Welcome. This is Jordan again. And listen, I want to do this video. This video is going to be one of my musical rants. And this is going to be titled The Selfish Musician. Right? Have we all encountered that one musician who just, they come in, they think it's all about them, whether they come to a gig, or they come to rehearsal, or they come to a recording session, and they just come in. They just play like obnoxiously, right? They think it's all about them. Sometimes they come in late. They don't know the music. You know, they're sewn all over the place. They have no sensitivity. They have no cognizance of the band, of the artist, and they're just doing their thing. Right? And this band, they have no concept of teamwork. Are you that musician? Or do you know somebody that is? I want to highlight a few problems with this type of musician, and I'm going to give you the solutions of it as well in this video. So in this video, we're going to talk about 6 things. I'm going to talk about 6 key elements that you want to be aware of so you don't become this selfish musician. 6 key elements that if you're aware of these and you make the proper shifts, you will actually sound like a seasoned musician. You'll sound like a seasoned player. And you know what, even sounding with the band, playing with the band, you will stand out. Right? Most musicians are trying to overplay and overcompensate for themselves, you know, within the band. And what happens is they stand out, but they stand out like a sore thumb. And they don't stand out in a good way. They stand out, and they stand out as if they were a rash. Right? You want to be able to stand out like a needle in the haystack. You want to be able to stand out like a diamond in the rough. That when somebody hears you amongst everyone else, they say, whoa, who is that musician? Wow, they're incredible. Instead of, oh my God, he's terrible. Who's that guy? They need to get him out of the band. Or her out of the band. Right? So let's talk about these six key elements. Number one, it is imperative that you know the material. Right? Now, this goes on whether you are a solo musician or whether you are playing in a band and you're playing covers. Right? Even as a solo musician, let's just say, as a sidebar, that a solo musician can get away with some of these things because there's nobody else for him or her to play with, right? They have a little more openness. They have a little more freedom of their creativity, of how they express. However, I want you to be aware that even with a solo musician, they're still playing for people, right? You're still on the stage. Maybe you're playing guitar and singing by yourself. Maybe you're playing piano singing by yourself. You know, maybe you're singing the tracks, right? You're still playing for the enjoyment of people, right? People, they want to hear something nice. They want to hear something that makes sense that they can digest, right? So if you're singing the song everywhere, you have no kind of thesis or no motif or concept of what is the melody, what are you playing? You know, it can make you come off very selfish and obnoxious, and people will not want to hear you. So that was a sidebar. So let's get back to number 1. Know the material. What are you playing that day, right? Do you know the melody to the song that you're going to be playing? Do you know all the parts to the song? Have you practiced all the chords? Right? Have you practiced your part? So when you come together with the band, you know, everybody's playing together, because there are songs, there's a lot of music that you're going to play together, and certain harmonies and certain chordal structures and certain notes, they're going to need to match and come together. There are going to be songs that at times the melodies might need to match. There are going to be songs at times the material is going to need to embed and support the artist. So it is very important that you know your material. Have you practiced material? Now, I get it. Me being a musician from New York, there are times where you might go to an open mic or you go to some events or venues where the music is off the cuff, right? There's no rehearsal for it. They say, do you know this song? But even now, we know the song. They say, hey, a singer comes in. Jordan, do you know this song? And I'm going to play the song, and sometimes the band knows and everybody picks it up. We might have rehearsed together, but everybody knew that material. And if we don't know the material, maybe we won't play the song, or maybe we'll give our own version. However, we probably will still know the melody. We have some kind of concept of what we're playing, right? And the artist will be aware that we don't particularly know exactly the song, in the whole, we haven't practiced it, but we will at least come to an agreement together with the band of how we can play the song and listen to each other to be able to support the artist. That brings me to my next step, number two. Number two, listen to and support the artist. Have you ever seen that selfish musician? They just come in and, I've seen this in bands. I've seen this even in maybe a piano accompaniment. And that musician is supposed to be supporting that artist. And that artist they're singing. They're supposed to have that freedom to sing the melody and the song. And that musician is playing all over the place. It's like they're playing all over on top of the person's vocals. The vocals can't be heard because the instrument is so distracted. Right? So it's important that you listen to the artist. What does the artist need in those moments? Maybe the artist is singing a very nice, sweet ballad. And that piano, maybe that guitar you're playing, it needs to have open chords. It needs to have space. Right? It needs to support the artist. So the artist has the freedom to move where they need to move with their vocals. Right? Or maybe this is a song where the artist, there's a singer and there's just singing, and maybe the music is fast and it's up pace, and the piano's kind of bouncing around on the bass and it's keeping rhythm, right? And that's what the artist needs, that support, because maybe they don't have a percussion or a drummer at the moment, and that piano is acting as that percussion, that rhythm, and that melody, and that artist needs that to keep the bump, to keep the rhythm. Yeah, you listen to artists, that's what you want to give. In that moment, you don't want to be just playing maybe black chords and just, laying back and playing too much space. That wouldn't call for that moment, for what that artist needs. So it is very important that, number two, you listen to what the artist needs. Listen to and support the artist. Be the accompaniment of the artist. Be the support of the artist. At that moment, it is not about you. It is about the artist. It is about both of you. It is about you as a collective, but you are there to support the artist. And the greater you can support the artist, I promise you, the greater that you will sound. And the artists will have great respect for you. People will have great respect for you. And you might even get some calls. Which brings me now to number three. Sometimes, we do gigs and it's a whole band, right? So we talked about playing for the artist, right? But there are times where, I've done, quite extensive stuff where I played with orchestras. I've done it where I played with, a whole choir, whole ensemble. Sometimes a 10-piece band of just the players. And it requires you to listen, right? I remember doing a gig where I was on piano and we had a Hammond organ and we had a pipe organ and we had a timpani and we had drums and we had percussion and we had 3 horn players and we had a whole, we had about 14 singers that were ensemble choir, as well as we had about 6 front singers. It was a lot of pieces, right? And if you are not listening to the band, if you are not aware of, number one, as we said, knowing the material, right? And if you are not listening to, at that time as well, we were also supporting an artist who was in the front. So not only we had the choir and the ensemble singers, you also had an artist in the front that had to do their thing. So with those first 2 steps and the third step, listening to the band, it was very important that we listen to each other. So that way we can fit, right? We want to be able to fit like a glove, and we want to be able to create enough space with all that stuff going on, so that way the artist wasn't distracted, and that way it wouldn't sound like a mess. It wouldn't sound like mud. So it is important that you listen to the band. I remember in this particular predicament, the situation I'm speaking about, where we had 2 organs. We had a Hammond organ and we had a pipe organ. So it was very crucial for those 2 organists to listen to each other, know their parts, because there were times that the pipe organ didn't play where the Hammond organ did. But then there were times that the 2 organs played together. And there were times that they had to play different placements, right? There were times where, I remember I was playing piano. Also, I didn't mention that we had another pianist also playing. So I forgot to mention that. So there were times where I would play piano and the pianist, he would just pad. And then vice versa. there were times, certain songs where he was playing piano, and I would like play, different string arrangements and different pads, and maybe different like woodwind instruments at that time. So it was very key that I was listening to all of my bandmates, listening to what all of them are doing in order to gel together properly, so that way nobody's stepping on each other's toes. And when the sound comes together, it's just, ooh, it's such a beautiful, it's a whole symphony, right? I want you to think about an orchestra. Sometimes there's 100 pieces in that orchestra. And when you hear it, it's like, wow, right? Because everybody knows their part. Everybody's playing together, right? There's a sense of unity. There's a sense of dynamics. And there's a sensitivity as well. Which brings me to number 4. Number 4 is playing with dynamics. Have you ever heard that, whew, that selfish musician? I remember when I would I remember going to a certain state, and I would go out into the community, and I remember going out into the music scene, and this was a very blues-oriented scene, and I remember going to some of these venues, and there was just a lot of guitar players, and I was just amazed, like, wow, there's a lot of blues guitar players out there, and they're really good. And what would happen was, me being a keyboardist, right, I was kind of a scarcity in the scene. And as I would go out, people, they would, hey, Jordan, can you play with me? Can you play with me? And I'm like, sure, I'll support you. And I would get on the stage, and I would play with them, and they would just ramp up their amps. And they had no sensitivity, right? They would just be playing, just soloing all over the place, playing loud, playing aggressive, when the moment didn't call for it, right? There were times where it's just a nice blues solo, everybody's kind of it's laid back, and it's like there was no sensitivity. The emotion was not coherent with what everybody else was doing, right? So it was very important that you have dynamics, right? There are gonna be times that you'll be playing together with people, right? And you'll have these what we call crescendos, which you'll learn in my course later, where the music might be a little soft, and then it gets big. It's like, hey, 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 right? That's called a crescendo. And what happens with those crescendos at times, everybody does it together, and then they come down together, right? And then there are times where the music's playing great, and the guitar, they go in and out, right? It's an individual at that time crescendo, right? That is a dynamic. That is a dynamic. That is a shift in sound. It's a shift in volume. It's a shift in velocity. It gives it a color. It gives it a color. Just like when I talk. Now imagine if I talk like this the whole video. Hi, my name is Jordan Williams, and I'm going to talk today about the selfish musician. I hope that you enjoy this video. Right? That would be a very monotonous, I would have a very monotone voice. And the videos, you'd probably fall asleep listening to these. But I have to have some kind of inflection. At times I get loud. And then at times I get soft. There are times I'm getting a point across to you. And then there are times I'm, telling you a fact. Or telling you something that's going to help you. Right? There's a certain inflection. There's a certain dynamic. A certain delivery that you can carry and you can articulate in your instrument. Whether that's your voice, whether that's you play keys, whether that's guitar, whether that's you play drums, right? There's a certain type of dynamic. And sometimes with these dynamics, they reflect collectively all together at the same time. And then sometimes they reflect individually, as I explained, right? So these dynamics are important. That selfish musician a lot of times has no concept, or they're not paying attention, or they just don't care about dynamics, right? There are times that you're going to need to bring the volume down for the artist and down for everybody so that they can hear. And this brings me on to my next one. My next key element, number 5, volume, right? How many times, I'm going to go back to this situation where I talked about being in this community with these amazing blues musicians and getting on that stage. It was like some of them had no sensitivity. I remember getting on stage with some of these guitar players. They had no concept of dynamics. They had no concept of sensitivity. They were playing loud all the time, right? And there were times where it called to be low. And I remember the volume. I remember some of them taking the amps, set them right up on the stage, right? And they would just crank that thing. And I remember I would have this amp right next to me, right? And I had it loud just enough so I can hear and I can still hear the singer. This guitar player puts the amp right next to mine on the other side, cranks it. I cannot hear myself playing at all. I started to max out my amp. I still couldn't hear it. It was so loud where I couldn't even hear the singer. And it was so loud that I was surprised, like, how would they even follow the music? Right? That selfish musician loves to come on the stage and they just take their speakers and they ramp it up so loud, thinking that, you know what, I need to be heard, and if people outside need to hear me. But I want to tell you one thing, being in this business and having these experiences for a long time and even talking to people, their feedback, that selfish musician does not get far. And they're not the one that gets calls, and they're not the one that people enjoy. They think that they sound amazing, they think that they're being heard. They are being heard. But they're not being heard as a good thing, right? They're not being heard where it's enjoyable. A lot of times, people are kind of annoyed by them. They're like, we want to hear the band. You know, you have your turn to solo, right? And of course, you want to have an amp that is loud enough that it can project, right? Especially if you're not plugged into like a house system, right? Especially if you just, you know, if you don't have, maybe your amp's not mic'd, right? You want to have a loud enough amp that can carry. But no, you need to be cognizant of the volume of the stage, right? If your amp is so loud where you can't hear everybody else, if your amp is so loud where you can't hear the singer, you're too loud. You need to bring your volume down. You need to bring your speaker down to a volume where everybody can hear. I should be able to hear the guitar just as the guitar can hear me. The guitar should be able to hear the singer just as the singer can hear the guitar. I should be able to hear the singer as the singer can hear the keyboard. Even the drums, right? There are times that drums they might need to have some kind of padding or gels, you know, on the drums so they can play lighter. Or there are times that, I get it, you need to play hard because you need the energy, right? There are times where, okay, maybe we do need to boost the sound up so that way you can level out the drums, but also bring the vocals up, right? Where the decibels are still adequate and acceptable for the room, right? Because again, you're playing for an audience of people, right? But it is very crucial and it's very important that you have a volume where everybody can hear together, right? Because when those dynamics are played and when those really cool things start coming out, it comes out beautifully and everybody gets to shine and everybody gets their kudos. So I want to dismiss the myth that playing louder is better. Playing together is better. Playing together is better. So think about that. Don't be that selfish musician who only plays for themselves and then not paying attention to their teammates. There is no I in band. Just like we say there's no I in team, there is no I in band. You're going to have better musicians than others, yes. You're going to have better players than others, yes. Right? Look at basketball. We have so many great players in the league, right? But it's the team that wins the championship. It is not that one person. That one person can take us far, but it's the team. So be mindful of that. You know, when you're dealing with your stage volume, when you're dealing with your dynamics, play together as a band. Play together as a band. And this leads me to my next point. Number 6, placement and staying in your lane. Right? I want you to think about this as I kind of mentioned as an analogy, basketball, like sports, right? There are certain players, right, that, yes, they can play all around, but they're kind of good at one thing, right? You might have a certain player that they just take those threes. Like, you know, there's that one player, they go to the hole, ooh, and they drive that thing, right? They drive it right to the hole in the layups, right? They're players who are just great at defense, right? Right? Yes, they're trained to be a good player all around, but they have a specific thing. Now, when it comes to number 6, I want you to think about this. Placement and staying in your lane. I have an example. I remember early in my journey when I was first starting out, and I remember playing at churches, for example, and being a keyboardist at the time. I did a lot of, when I was starting, it was a lot of playing by myself, right? Normally that's what happens with us. We start in the beginning, we're kind of learning, so we wind up becoming our own accompanimists. We wind up becoming these solo musicians who later emerge and evolve into these seasoned musicians that could play by themselves as well as with a band. And at that time, I remember I didn't have much experience playing with a band. So I remember being on a gig with a whole band. It was bass, drums, guitar, and me on keys. And we had a vocalist and like 3 background singers. And I remember being on this gig, and I remember the bass player was like, "Yo, bro, get out of my lane." And I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I found out later that I was playing the bass. I was trying to play the bass with my left hand and playing chords with my right. And I noticed that what was happening, I was clashing with the bass player. And all our notes, the low end notes, the bottom notes were getting muddy because I was getting in his way. There's a frequency, there's a spectrum, right? And you'll learn that stuff later in the academy. There's a spectrum of notes, right, that are articulated and held at the bottom. There are spectrums. I want you to understand that there's spectrums there's an audio spectrum. We have from lows to high, to mid lows, to mids, to high mids, to highs, right? There's a whole spectrum of how music flows. And in that spectrum where the bottom is, right, where those low hertz are, right, there needs to be space for that bass player to do his thing and it to be heard and hold that root, hold those bass notes for the chords I was supposed to be playing. And at that time, I was playing a lot of bass. I was moving around, and he's trying to move around. So you can imagine, it just sounded like a mess because we're just clashing on top of each other. So I had to learn to stay in my lane. I had to learn that I had to start adjusting my left hand to where it can more support my chords in the right. So I had to learn things like rootless voicings. I had to learn things like just staying out of that spectrum, right? So that way he could do his thing. And when it comes together, when he plays and I play, there's a nice sound that is cohesive, right? Just like a guitar player. That guitar player might be playing that melody. And if I'm sitting there trying to play the melody on top of him, there are times that happens, but there are times that it's guitar player playing the melody, right? There are times the guitar player is chicken, and they're up in the high frequency. And if I'm up there in a high frequency, and who's holding the middle? Who's holding the mid space? Who's holding the mid range of sound? Right? So this is about staying in your lane. That gig, I was a pianist. I was a keyboardist for that gig. I wasn't brought in as a bass player. So I should stay in my lane and do what I was hired to do. And that was play keys. Right? There are times that I remember being on certain gigs that the drummer is playing very rhythmically. It could be 60 notes, and I'm trying to chop, and I'm playing all this stuff, and it's like, no, now I'm getting away the drummer. There are times I just need the pad and let the percussion do its thing, and let the bass maybe keep that groove. But there's times that I'll be chopping. So you just gotta know where is your lane. You gotta understand that placement, right? There's a certain placement, right? There's a whole spectrum of sound, and you even learn this in my mixing videos, that there's a spectrum of how we even mix the music. Like, where is the music? Where is the piano sitting in the frequency? Where is the guitar sitting in the frequency? Where is the bass sitting in the frequency? Where is the snare drum sitting in the frequency? Where is the horns sitting in the frequency, right? They all have a certain frequency that, they all claim their space. So that's very important. So I want you to be cognizant that when you're playing, that you're cognizant. I want you to be cognizant that when you're playing I want you to be cognizant when you're playing of the placement that you're taking, right? Because the selfish musician has no concept. The selfish musician does not pay attention to placement, and they just play all over the place. They don't stay in their lane. They get in everybody else's lane. Don't be that musician. Stay in your lane. Don't be that musician stepping on everybody's toes, right? There is no I in band. Play together. And I'm telling you, when you play in your space, people will have such a greater appreciation, such a greater respect for you, right? Stay in your lane, right? And I'm telling you, you'll start getting the calls back. I've seen where musicians, they'll do a gig and they're like, man, I know I killed that gig. And they're like, how come they don't call me back? How come I'm not doing that gig? And they see somebody else replace them. Sometimes just organic, it happens, right? Maybe that person was just meant to do that gig, or maybe they moved on, or maybe they made changes. But sometimes it's also that musician They could have been a very selfish musician. They weren't a team player. They didn't pay attention, right? And I'm going to give you a bonus as I close this video that I didn't talk about, which is not technical. And this is your attitude. Number 7, as a bonus, is your attitude. Your attitude is everything. I've seen musicians who, and I don't judge anybody because everybody is different. Everybody has their own style and their own way. But I've seen musicians who were probably a little below the standard of what a certain gig or a certain artist was requiring to hire them for, but their attitude was so great that they got hired for the gig. And when they got hired for the gig, the artists, right, or the organization that brought them in was willing to say, you know what, we love their attitude. We love their potential. We're willing to pour into them. We're willing to work with the potential and see how much more they can grow, right? So you'll be surprised how your talent, you'll be surprised how your skills, how your attitude will sometimes be precedent, will sometimes override, will exceed your skill level. Attitude is how you get the calls back. Attitude is how you incur the mentors that really want to take you on their wing and help you to push you to the next level. So have a good attitude. Don't be that selfish musician who comes in late and just comes doing what they want, doesn't listen to anybody, thinks they know it all. I promise you, the selfish musician does not get far. They lose the gigs quick. And they'll have a hard time sustaining themselves with music. And most times people might not really want to play with them. Don't be the selfish musician. Have a good attitude. Be on time. Be courteous. Be humble. Be professional. Right? And I'm telling you, you will go far. And that's my rant for today. The selfish musician. I wanted to highlight this person who you don't want to be like. But pay attention to those 7 key elements. Pay attention. If you see yourself there, make those changes that we spoke about. Know the material. Know the melody of the song. Listen to the artist. Support the artist. Listen to the band. Support your band. Play together. You're a team. Listen to your dynamics. Be sensitive of the parts. Be sensitive of the notes. Be sensitive of the chords. Be sensitive of playing together, your tone, all those things. Number 5, your volume. Pay attention to your volume. Don't blast anybody out. Keep your volumes down. Keep them together. Right? Everybody should be heard. It's very important that everybody is heard. Number 6, placement. Stay in your place. Stay in your lane. Do what you were hired for or what you were brought in for. Stay in your lane. Make your contribution. And when you do, it creates a whole symphony together and it sounds good. Right? Pay attention to your placement and stay in your lane. And number 7, our bonus, have a good attitude and you will go far. Thank you guys for listening to this musical rant, and I hope you have a good day, and I will see you on stage.